This happened in the fall of 2019, and I still can't explain what I saw that night. I grew up in a small town in northern Washington, about 40 miles from the Canadian border. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where the nearest Walmart is a 30-minute drive, and where the forest isn't just nearby, it's everywhere. My family owned a modest two-story house on the edge of town, right where the residential area meets the tree line. Our backyard was basically the forest. No fence, no clear boundary, just our lawn that gradually turned into undergrowth and then dense woods. My bedroom was on the second floor, facing those trees. Two windows, one overlooking the driveway, one staring straight into that dark wall of pines and cedars. I'd spent my entire childhood in that house, 17 years at the time this happened. I'd seen deer in our yard dozens of times, black bears maybe 4 or 5 times, coyotes occasionally. Even spotted a cougar once when I was 12. Wildlife was normal, expected, part of living where we did. That particular autumn was weird from the start. Late September into early October, and the weather couldn't decide what it wanted to do. Some days were warm enough for shorts, other days felt like winter was arriving early. The trees were changing colors at different rates. Some were already bare, others still had green leaves mixed with orange and red. Around that time, there'd been talk in town about unusual animal behavior. Mrs. Patterson, who lived 3 houses down, said her chickens had been acting strange for weeks, refusing to leave their coop even during the day. The Johnson's dog, a German shepherd that normally barked at everything, had gone almost completely silent and would just stare at the tree line for hours. My dad mentioned that several hunters he knew had been finding deer carcasses in the woods, not eaten by predators, not shot, just dead. Broken necks, crushed ribs. He said whatever was killing them had to be incredibly strong because deer aren't easy to take down that way. But he figured it was probably just a bear getting aggressive before hibernation season. I didn't think much about any of it. I was a senior in high school, more worried about college applications and my part-time job at the local grocery store than about local wildlife mysteries. But looking back now, all those things were building up to what happened. The forest behind our house was dense, really dense. Once you got about 50 feet in, the canopy was so thick that even on sunny days it was dim. There were game trails that hunters used, but mostly it was just wild, untouched woodland that stretched for miles. My dad had taken me hiking back there when I was younger, teaching me to recognize landmarks so I wouldn't get lost. A distinctive lightning-struck tree here, an oddly shaped boulder there, a small creek that ran east to west. The incident happened on a Tuesday night. I remember because I had finished a terrible chemistry exam that day and was just relieved to be home. My parents had driven to Seattle that afternoon for some medical appointments and weren't due back until late Wednesday. My older sister was away at college, so it was just me and our cat, Murphy, an orange tabby who was usually fearless but had been acting skittish all week. I'd gotten home around 4 p.m., made myself some instant ramen, and settled in to binge watch a show on my laptop. Nothing unusual. The house was quiet except for the normal creaking sounds old houses make and the occasional gust of wind rattling the windows. Around 9:30 p.m., I was still up in my room when Murphy suddenly jumped off my bed and ran to the window facing the woods. His ears were flat against his head, and he was making this low growling sound I'd never heard from him before. Not a hiss, not a meow, but this guttural, primal growl that made the hair on my arm stand up. I got up and looked out the window, but it was pitch black outside. We didn't have any lights in the backyard, and with the new moon that week, there was zero natural light, just darkness and the vague outline of trees against the slightly lighter sky. Murphy wouldn't leave the window. He just kept staring out, occasionally growling, his tail puffed up to twice its normal size. I tried to pick him up, but he squirmed out of my arms and went right back to the window. That's when I started feeling uneasy. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing it out the window into the yard. The beam didn't reach very far, maybe 30 feet before it just dissolved into the darkness. I couldn't see anything unusual, just grass, a few scattered leaves, the edge of the tree line. But then I heard it, a sound that I can still hear perfectly in my head whenever I think about that night. It started as a low rumble, almost like distant thunder, but it was clearly coming from the woods behind our house. Then it rose in pitch and volume into something between a roar and a scream, not like any animal I'd ever heard, not a bear, not a cougar, not an elk, something else entirely. The sound lasted maybe 5 seconds, but it felt like forever. When it stopped, the silence that followed was somehow worse. Complete silence. No crickets, no rustling leaves, no distant highway noise. Nothing. Like everything in the forest was holding its breath. My heart was pounding. Murphy had backed away from the window and was now hiding under my bed. I stood there frozen, phone still in my hand, trying to convince myself it was just some animal I wasn't familiar with. Maybe a bear with a weird vocalization. Maybe some YouTube prank video playing in the distance that just sounded close. Then I saw movement. Something large shifting in the tree line about 40 feet from the house. My phone's flashlight was still pointing in that general direction, and in that narrow beam of light, I saw what looked like a figure standing between 2 pine trees. At first, I thought it was a person, just someone standing there, maybe a neighbor or a lost hiker. But as my eyes adjusted and I kept the light steady, I realized this wasn't right. The figure was too tall, way too tall. If it was a person, they'd have to be at least 7 or 8 feet tall, and the proportions were wrong. The shoulders were too broad, the arms too long. I should mention, my name is Fernanda, and I run this channel, The Hidden Archive, because of experiences like this one. Encounters that don't fit into neat explanations, moments that change how you see the world. But that night, I was just a terrified 17-year-old trying to understand what I was looking at. The figure stood completely still for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 20 or 30 seconds. I couldn't make out details, just a dark, massive silhouette against the slightly less dark background of the forest. Then it moved. Not like a person walking. It took one step to the side, and even from that distance, I could tell the movement was wrong. Too smooth, too powerful, like watching something that weighed 500 pounds move with the grace of a deer. I dropped my phone. The flashlight beam swung wildly as it hit the floor, and by the time I scrambled to pick it up and point it back at the tree line, the figure was gone. Just trees and darkness again. No movement, no sound, nothing. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone steady. I backed away from the window and sat on my bed, trying to process what I'd just seen. Part of my brain was screaming that it was Bigfoot, that I'd just seen an actual Sasquatch in my backyard. The other part was desperately trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear standing on its hind legs. Maybe it was a person in a costume. Maybe the darkness and my anxiety had distorted what I was actually seeing. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, debating what to do. Call my parents? They were 2 hours away and would just tell me to lock the doors and go to bed. Call the police? And say what? Officer, I think I saw Bigfoot. They'd laugh me off the phone. Call a friend? Same problem. So I did what any modern teenager would do. I started Googling. Bigfoot sightings, Washington State. Large creature in woods. Unexplained sounds, forest. I fell into a rabbit hole of reports, grainy videos, heated debates in forums, and what I found made my blood run cold. There had been 3 reported Bigfoot sightings in our county in the past 6 months, one just 12 miles from our house. All of them described the same thing, a massive bipedal creature, 7 to 9 feet tall, covered in dark brown or black hair, moving through the forest with unnatural silence. Several reports mentioned the same terrifying vocalization I just heard. I was so absorbed in my phone that I didn't notice Murphy had come out from under the bed. I didn't notice him go back to the window. I didn't notice anything until he started making that growling sound again, louder this time, more desperate. I looked up and my heart stopped. The figure was back. But this time it wasn't at the tree line.
It was in the middle of our yard, maybe 20 feet from the house, and it was facing my window. I could see it more clearly now, and what I saw contradicted everything I thought I knew about reality. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, maybe more. The body was covered in dark hair or fur that seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. The arms hung down past where its knees would be. The head sat on broad shoulders with almost no neck visible, just a slope from the shoulders to the head. And it was staring directly at my window. I couldn't see eyes, couldn't make out facial features, but I knew with absolute certainty that this thing was staring right at me. The intelligence behind that gaze was palpable. This wasn't a dumb animal. This was something aware, something observant, something that knew exactly what it was doing. We stayed like that for what might have been 30 seconds, but felt like 30 minutes. Me frozen at my window, phone clutched in my hand, this creature standing in my backyard, completely motionless, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Then, without any warning, it turned and walked toward the woods, not running, not hurrying, just walking with these long, powerful strides that covered ground impossibly fast. 3 steps and it was at the tree line. 2 more steps and it had vanished into the darkness like it had never been there at all. The silence that followed was deafening. Murphy finally stopped growling and just sat there staring at where the creature had disappeared. I stood at my window, shaking, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Every rational part of my brain was screaming that this couldn't be real, that Bigfoot was a myth, a joke, a story people told around campfires. But the other option was the undeniable. I'd just seen a real live Bigfoot in my backyard, not a photo, not a video, not a story someone told me. I had seen it with my own eyes, less than 30 feet from me for more than half a minute, and there was no explanation that made sense except the impossible one. Bigfoot was real, and it had just visited my backyard.
I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat on my bed with every light in my room on, doors locked, checking the window every few minutes until the sun finally came up around 6:30 a.m. When morning came, I went outside to look for evidence, footprints, broken branches, anything. The grass in our yard showed signs of disturbance where the creature had stood. The blades were pressed down in a way that suggested significant weight, but there were no clear footprints because the ground was too dry. At the tree line, I found one broken branch about 8 feet up that looked freshly snapped, and what might have been a tuft of dark hair caught on the bark of a pine tree. I collected the hair in a plastic bag, took photos of everything, and went back inside. When my parents got home that afternoon, I told them everything. My dad listened quietly, then went outside to look for himself. He came back inside with a weird expression, like he wanted to dismiss what I told him but couldn't quite manage it. He never said he believed me, but he also never said he didn't. He just asked me to be careful and to call him immediately if I ever saw anything like that again. My mom was more skeptical, but agreed that something had clearly scared me and the cat. Over the next few weeks, I talked to some locals who'd lived in the area their whole lives, people my parents' age, even older, and what I learned was unsettling. Almost everyone had a story. Either they'd seen something themselves, or their parents had, or their grandparents. These stories went back generations, but nobody talked about them openly. It was like this unspoken agreement in the community to just not discuss it. One elderly woman, Mrs. Patterson's mother, who was visiting from out of state, told me something that still haunts me. She said her grandfather used to trap in those woods in the 1940s, and he always said there were parts of the forest you didn't go into, not because they were dangerous in the traditional sense, but because they lived there. The old families knew. They'd always known. They just didn't tell outsiders because outsiders always reacted the same way. Skepticism, mockery, demands for proof that couldn't be provided. The really disturbing part? She said these creatures weren't aggressive unless provoked. They mostly kept to themselves, observed humans from a distance, and avoided direct contact. But every few decades, something would happen. Encounters would increase, sightings would cluster, and then things would go quiet again for years. According to her, we were in one of those active periods, and based on what I had experienced and the other recent sightings in the area, she was right. I don't live in that house anymore. I moved away for college and never moved back, but I think about that night constantly. I think about what it means that something like that can exist in our world, in our forests, just beyond the reach of our streetlights and our certainty. The really unsettling thing isn't that I saw Bigfoot. The really unsettling thing is realizing how much of the world we don't understand, how many things exist in those spaces we don't look at closely. And once you've accepted that, once you've seen something that shouldn't exist, but does, you start questioning everything else you thought you knew for certain. Life before and after seeing something unexplainable are two fundamentally different things. You can't unknow what you've learned. You can't unsee what you've witnessed. And you start to wonder what else is out there, just beyond the edge of your perception, watching and waiting. If you've had your own unexplainable encounter, share it in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, stories that explore the hidden corners of our reality, make sure to subscribe to The Hidden Archive and hit that notification bell, because some truths don't fit into neat explanations, and some experiences change everything. Thanks for watching. I'm Fernanda, and I'll see you in the next one.